Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Good, and yourself?
I'm good.
Hi, Janie. You're muted. You're still muted. Here.
There we go. That's better. Okay. Sorry, I do Zoom meetings
Okay.
twice a month, and this is always a new thing.
Yeah, I do way more than that, unfortunately.
I'm sure you do.
I mean, there are days I'll get 6 in a day.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. It
Oh, well.
definitely it's either Zoom or it's Teams. We do a lot of Teams as well.
Oh yeah.
Looks like you have a nice place to join us from, though.
I do. Am I still muted?
Nope, you're not muted.
Okay. Good. I just declined a phone call. Anyway, yeah, I decided I'd take advantage of one of the last nice days of summer and sit outside because I can.
Very nice. I try to do that myself as well as much as I can, as long as my internet wants to work outside. So
Yeah.
I try.
Well, I'm kind of on the edge of our wireless, so that as long as has worked before, so I'll do it as long as I can.
Good.
So
Hi, Leon.
how's the conference going?
I think it's going great.
Good.
I've moderated a few sessions now and been able to go to several ones I wanted. I like that I can go back and watch ones because we're recording them.
Nice.
But yeah, I like this format. I think it's working quite well, and we've gotten a lot of positive comments, feedback from it. So
Pretty amazing, the pivot to technology, and
right.
it's doing things that we really have always wanted to do, like record stuff
Uh-huh.
that we haven't had a chance to do, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I like it. It's very nice. What do you think, Leon?
I think it's been going great. Yeah. Considering everything, the way the world is today, I think there's been some real silver linings in terms of how many people we've been able to reach with this conference. I think being able to record those sessions is going to be immensely valuable for us, and membership for the next year, I think, is how long we're making those available. So
Yep.
Yeah, there's lots of wins for sure.
And speaking of win, no.
Mark Winnie, hi!
Oh, you're muted. I'll unmute you. At least I'll try to unmute you. There you go.
I arrived right on cue.
Mark, good to see you.
Jeannie, there you are. Hey, you looking good?
Yeah, you too.
Well, gee, what can I say?
And
Hey,
nice to
Mark-
meet you, Leon.
Nice to meet you too, Janie. Yeah. Thank you for doing this, and thanks for all the support. It's really been great the way this has come about. So, actually, Mark, I was going to ask. I don't want to mispronounce your last name. Is it Win or Winnie?
Winnie.
Winnie. Thank
Like-
you. Okay.
Just like the bear.
Okay. Sounds good.
Just sweet as honey.
I like him.
I'll stop.
So I think we talked about how this flow would go, and I'll just do that real quick for everyone here. So I'm going to start by just saying hi to everyone, and then we're going to hear from the mayor of Boise, Lauren McLean, and then Mayor McLean will hand it off to you, Janie, to introduce Mark. And that's kind of the way this will run. And Christy hopefully will help me keep on track if I get lost along the way, but should be pretty easy.
And then Christy, will you manage questions that come out of after I'm done?
Yes. Yeah, we have in the Whova app, there's the chat and the session Q&A tabs on the side, and that's worked quite well for people to submit questions, and then I just relay them when we get to that point.
Okay.
And we'll be doing that for the mayor as well.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Can you hear me okay and everything?
Yeah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Thanks for giving me the link. Sorry I was pestering you.
No, that's okay. I'm traveling right now, which has been another upside of the conference being virtual. Is I've actually been able to participate and not have to be in.
Yeah,
But
totally.
I've been running all over the place, and so if I've been a little late on emails, it's.
Oh, no, it's been a weird week, yeah. Janie's outside at her farm. I love that. I wish I was there.
Give you the virtual tour of the farm here.
Yes.
You win with best backdrop for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm up for Room Raider being a 10 of 10. That's all. I'm all about that.
Janie, if Brett is out at the farm today, tell him I said hi. Tell him Sarah
Hi.
Payton said hi.
I will. He was here yesterday, but I never know when he's going to pop in.
Yeah.
So I will do that. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. She'll be here in just a minute.
And Christy, are you going to move the slides? Should I just cue you to move slides or what?
Well, it's up to you. You can either share your screen and do the PowerPoint. Whoa.
Do you mind doing it? It just
No,
sometimes I find I get distracted.
Nope. Not a problem at all. I have it.
I got about, I don't know what I have. 9 maybe.
Yeah, I was just pulling it up so that I made sure I had it in case we needed it. Stop, computer. Sorry, my computer's being slow today. I'm not sure. Maybe all these people online watching the APA conference is slowing my internet today.
You would hope.
We have about one, yeah, right? Let me, sorry. I am going to get this going. At least I will try to get this going.
How's the weather been in Boise?
It's been
Fantastic.
pretty beautiful, yeah.
Great.
Pretty nice this time of year. Yeah.
Until Saturday, and it goes downhill from there, but that's okay. We need the rain desperately. It's really, really right. And we have a lot of smoke from the California fires.
Well, it kind of looked a little gray behind you. I was wondering if it was smoke.
You can see maybe 1.5 miles. That's, I don't even know what's going in my lungs. It's pretty sad to think about that.
Oh, man. Yeah.
How about your weather, Mark?
Well, dry as a bone. Pretty nice though right now. We had our all of our smoke is pretty much cleared out. But we still, I think we're picking up a little bit more now from California. But we had a couple of days where people had to drive around with their headlights on. It was so thick.
Wow.
All right,
Wow.
it is 10 o'clock,
Right. Can you drop the
so
lights down?
we can go ahead and get started.
Okay, sounds good. I don't know if you can mute everyone but me. Maybe do that.
Yes, I will do that.
All right, thanks, Christy.
I'm gonna turn it up.
Okay. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Leon Lutzen, president of APA Idaho. Welcome to today's keynote event where we'll be hearing from Mark Winnie, author of Foodtown USA, 7 Unlikely Cities That Are Changing the Way We Eat. This event was made possible by contributions from the Blue Cross of Idaho Foundation for Health and the Treasure Valley Food Coalition. Thank you both for your generous support. Before we hear from Mr. Winnie, I'd like to introduce the mayor of Boise, Lauren McLean, who has spoken with us in the past, last in 2018 while serving as the president of Boise's City Council. She was elected Boise's first female mayor ever in 2020. She has served this community for more than 20 years, including 9 years on City Council. Although this year has certainly been filled with a number of challenges, Mayor McLean has been working hard and making great strides in her efforts to create a city for everyone. As a personal employee of hers, I can attest to that. So with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, Mayor McLean, and the stage is yours.
Hi there. Thanks, Leon. Really appreciate it. I'm unmuted now, correct? Just want to get it. Great. Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this virtual conference. I remember that morning at the over at the convention center, the Grove Center on the Grove, when I got to speak with you all in person, and appreciate the invitation to come back and give you a virtual welcome to Boise, since we're not all in the same place. And I have to say, I love seeing Janie on her farm. She's definitely not in Boise. Good morning, Janie. Since we're talking about food, I'll just say before I talk about housing and some other initiatives, that local food is really important to me. Janie has fed our family lamb for many, many years. And our family has a personal relationship with farmer Eagle Organic Farms, who has fed us for 23 seasons and now actually feeds us starting in the spring with eggs and spring vegetables, early spring, and goes all the way through Thanksgiving. And so having that so close to a vibrant urban center is incredibly important, not just for our health, but for the environment and ecosystem in general, to still have working farms near cities, small farms and CSAs within cities. It's important to me, and I know it's important to many, many people in this community. And I love that Mark, who we met, I think, at a reception that was at my house a couple years ago when you were visiting. I love that Mark ended up talking about this area and kind of the surprises that you'll find here with regard to food. I think it's spot on. So great to know that the two of you are speaking with the conference today. I wanted just to touch on a couple things related to planning. And that is, as we think about how we do everything we can to meet the needs and expectations of this moment, the challenges brought on by COVID, and not only the health challenges, but the economic challenges, the challenges brought on by climate, and then of course the challenges brought on by calls to truly address racial justice and inequity. We here at the City of Boise are committed to ensuring that the steps we take respond to those challenges, get us ahead as soon as possible so that our community can thrive, and do everything with a mind towards ensuring that our city is a city for everyone. And I wanted to touch on housing and then some of our climate action just quickly, because we had, we've got this economic crisis here and around the country, and we had a team of people come together, think tank leaders, university leaders, business leaders, and retired business leaders, that said the 3 things we need to focus on to recover are housing, health, and workforce development. And housing in particular, some people would be surprised, perhaps, that it's part of the economic equation, but we have to ensure that we have housing in our community that people working in our community can afford, because we want you to be able to live in the city in which you work, to help create the vibrant community that really is for everyone. And Leon, as the housing manager, is charged with a lot of the work that we've taken on since January. And I want to say that COVID shed light on the challenges that residents were already experiencing, that they made clear in this last election. But then it became even more clear to the rest of the community that we really have to address things like jobs, wages, and economic opportunity, climate, and through that we create opportunity economically. But we've done a couple things that I just wanted to highlight, because as planners, as we think about how we grow out our community, we are thinking about housing affordability. And so we have acquired quite a bit of land this year within city limits to be part of our affordable housing land bank or land trust. And the Franklin and Orchard development RFP that went out is a perfect example of, it was our proof of concept. We wanted to see how it worked. If the city had land, offered it out for proposals from developers with requirements around affordability, mixed use, integration with the neighborhood, and in that case, a park. And we are committed to continuing to do that, because I believe that by kind of nurturing and incubating a land bank, we increase the opportunity to have development our way, with a nod to the importance of ensuring that we have homes at different price points within neighborhoods for those that work here, and while also creating community spaces and mixed use development, particularly close to transit nodes and transit lines. So there's that, the housing land bank. And then we're working on a housing bonus ordinance that will clearly delineate where the city would negotiate, whether it be height, density, parking, et cetera, in exchange for a set number of units within that proposed development at particular rates of affordability. And that'll be out this fall for comment. And I really want to make sure that we hear from not only the public, but those who would be building these homes, because I want to make sure that we create a program that actually gets what the city needs, and that is several hundred units at various affordability price points a year. And then finally, we're looking at a housing incentives program, and we can always stack these things, especially with the land bank, again, to ensure that we're doing what we can to encourage as much affordable housing within our neighborhoods and along our transit lines throughout the city. So some of you probably saw that we are doing a zoning rewrite, and I want to flag for that we created a committee of practitioners and residents throughout the community. So we look neighborhood by neighborhood to try to disperse membership. And that'll look at, that committee, as well as the public process, will look at a rewrite of our zoning code. We need to be able to plan along transit lines, et cetera, for a denser city. But we also have to recognize, when you stack it with some of our affordable housing initiatives, that we need to do everything we can, that as more housing is built, that's not the only solution. It might not be the solution. We have to have the tools to make sure that it can be afforded by Boise residents and Boise workers. And then I just want to touch on climate. because it's a big challenge that has not and was not addressed by the generations before us as it should have been. And so now it's on us. And housing, commercial development, building, something that all of you are involved with, as you know well, has the largest impact on climate. So we can look at it from all different perspectives, whether it be in our goals to be 100% clean energy city, it requires electrification. And so we'll look to city buildings and incentives to ensure that private buildings look at electrification, because that's the way we can use 100% clean electricity and drop our carbon impact. As a city, we announced our internal goal of 2035 to be carbon neutral. That'll require us to build differently, to electrify our fleet, to expand our geothermal system, and to do those things while we're learning how we can achieve a similar goal at a certain period of time after as a city, because it's so important. And that makes housing more affordable when we have clean energy that's looked at and mitigated for the climate risk. And then people are paying less month to month as they're paying their rent or paying their mortgages. And our air is healthier, cleaner, and we're all healthier. So we start a climate action division. We're developing a climate roadmap that integrates economic development and opportunity and innovation with our climate action, and look at it as a tool and a strategy to ensure that we're preparing for a 21st century economy and a 21st century city and region that takes into account the importance of open space, ag land, and local food, climate mitigation, adaptation, and ultimately resilience. And of course, a community where people can afford to live where they work and actively participate with us along the way. So thanks so much for joining the conference. I think I kick it off. Do I hand it over to Janie now? Enjoy the day. Look forward to seeing all of you in person a year from now. Take care.
Thank you, Mayor McLean. We do have a couple questions if you have some time.
Yeah, I do.
The first question, well, it's a comment and a question. Says, thank you for your leadership in creating a city for everyone. The first question is, how do you envision the city working with strategic partners, and especially other government entities such as the county, state, and highway district, to realize your important initiatives?
Yeah, I envision us actually working with everyone because it's so important. To me, it's basic. It's not always easy. There are going to be things that different government entities, different communities within this region disagree on. But at the end of the day, I deeply believe that so goes Boise, so goes the Valley, so goes the Valley, so goes Boise, and the state, to be honest. And so we've set out intentionally to build relationships pretty much from the Oregon border in. I participate in Treasure Valley Partnership regularly. I am in regular conversations with mayors throughout this valley. We've looked for ways we can partner with the highway district successfully to start to build on that success. And so we partnered with the highway district when it came to closing 8th Street, which is a street that we own, so we could close in partnership with them. And so we did that together, and then have looked at how we can place and expand businesses into parking spaces and into the streets and other areas as a partnership. And then, honestly, COVID has required and kind of forced upon us the need to be communicating more regularly. And we all have different thoughts on approaches to protecting public health in this region. Yet it has required us to get to know each other, forge relationships, understand what's important to each other, and then work together wherever possible, either with the county or the health district, myself with the state as well. So I really see this as paramount, recognizing that partnership doesn't mean that you're always going to do what someone asks you to do as a city, and nor can I expect that other agencies always do what I ask them. But partnership, in my mind, is a willingness to recognize that, what we share in common is that we each care deeply about the communities that we lead, that there are connections there, because all of these big problems expand beyond one city's borders. And so we have to tick off where we can work together. And over time, I believe that the number of things that we work on together will just grow.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question is a slightly personal question. So since our keynote will focus on food, can you share something local you enjoy at your Thanksgiving celebration?
So I love our Thanksgiving celebration, except this year I'm really sad. And now I'm feeling really sad because
Oh.
first I'm going to tell you about our Thanksgiving celebration, because my children always say that we can't go anywhere for Thanksgiving because we have the best Thanksgiving celebration. And to me, that just like makes me so happy that my kids love Thanksgiving so much. So we start our day typically by hosting about 100 people in the park behind our house to play football. But really it just means that everybody brings food and drinks and their coats, and we sit around fires and watch the kids that were tiny at first that are now bigger than us play football. And then we spend the rest of the day cooking with friends typically, and our kids participate too. And I was mentioning Jill at Eagle Organic Farms. We usually get from Jill a whole bag of stuff. Like I look at what I want to make and what my friends are making, and then just check in with her on what she has. So we get Brussels sprouts from her. For many years, we got our turkey from her until she gave up raising turkeys because foxes kept eating them right before Thanksgiving. And so I love to use local pumpkins to make our pumpkin pies. And we seek out apples for our apple. We do a ton of desserts, apple pies. And then we'll do so of course, this is all sounding like all we do is eat meat. Cause I was like, and we find local sausage for our stuffing, but typically it's the vegetables and the greens that we can get and the potatoes that we can get from Jill, or we'll go to the co-op for the extra stuff and often for the turkey now, since Jill doesn't have turkeys, to create the feast that we truly, truly love to make.
Thank you very much. That was the last of the questions that I have, unless anybody has any more for Mayor McLean. Sorry, it looks weird. I have to keep looking to the side because that's where my other monitor
and my
is.
computer screen is here so I can see you, but my camera is here, so I do the same.
I know I keep doing the side eye, but I swear. Okay, I don't see any more questions coming through. Thank you so much for joining us. Leon, did you want to add to that?
Oh, just wanted to thank you again, Mayor, and great to see you at the conference again, even albeit in a virtual format. But yeah, thank you so much, and on to Janie and the introduction for Mark Winnie. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. Enjoy, everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm assuming I'm unmuted. If I am, you'll probably hear some random rooster noises here at Meadowlark Farm, which I hope will accentuate and at least punctuate my introductory remarks today. I'm glad to bring you this virtual performance from Meadowlark Farm, south of Nampa. I want to talk a little bit about my insight into what's happened to our food system. In February, I would have described our food system, and when I say food system, I mean all the actors of how we eat, from the seeds to production, all the processing, how it gets delivered, how you eat it, what happens to the waste. That's all the big system. And in February, I might have described the food system as being fragile, if not on the cusp of breaking. There were an awful lot of pieces that were not working and virtually unsustainable. And that ranges from farmers not making money, and I mean farmers of all scales across the country, farm workers and food processing workers not receiving equitable wages and working in unhealthy and sometimes dangerous conditions. There are a lot of rural communities that have been failing over the last decades due to the change in how we farm and how we produce food. We also have a lot of hungry people. In February, I would have described it as a crisis, all the hungry people in this country that is seemingly full of a lot of food and a lot of wealth. We had degraded habitats, and our food was being produced in ways that didn't enhance the environment, instead degraded it. And that's how I would have described the world in February. A bunch of rubber bands, tightly stretched, any one of them breaking, ready to pull down the whole system. But it was actually pretty invisible to most people, because if you use the metric of food in the grocery store, well, hey, there was food in the grocery store. What was the problem? But that all changed in March. The COVID crisis created a lot of interesting ramifications to our food system, some of which are invisible, but I describe it as a 100-car pileup. That continues to happen today. We're not really sure of what happened in the pileup. There's still some things that aren't working well, but despite the pileup, which injured a lot of the food system, there was always a lane open. And if you were looking downstream, down the road, you might say, there's still some food in the grocery store. What's the problem? And so what did that March event, that COVID event that continues today, what did it look like? Well, from my standpoint, the meat industry, both nationally and locally, fell into a lot of chaos. There were farmers that tragically had to slaughter thousands of head of livestock and poultry in the Midwest because the processing capability couldn't take that livestock. And in fact, here locally, the butcher that I use for my lamb tells me that someone bought 170 head of hogs, 170 pigs from someone in the Midwest, and was calling around the country to find a place to process them. Not exactly the smartest thing, but I hope they found some place where that could happen. And instantly that my local butcher filled up, not with folks from the Midwest or across the country, but with local people who were looking for places to butcher cows, because the COVID crisis revealed the basic insecurity of our food system, and people were buying whole animals. People who wouldn't have bought more than a steak, they were calling local farmers and saying, I need to know where my food's coming from. I need to be able to feed my family. And so my local butcher has filled up, not just for this year, but for all of next year. 2 months ago, I was asked to forecast my butcher dates for all of 2021. And I'm sure they'd like it if I could do it for 2022. We also saw the seed industry become gripped by this wave of new gardeners who really caused a lot of the seed companies to become overtaxed, and many of them closed it down for a couple of weeks in April just so they could restock. They were absolutely overwhelmed. The seed growers that I know here regionally in the Treasure Valley, the small lot seed growers, they were overwhelmed, and they got calls from seed companies, what do you have in your back room? We'll buy everything that you have. And also, it exists today. This continuing crisis, this 100-car pileup continues today in that canning lids. I don't know how many of you are canners, but go to your local store, go on Amazon, try to find canning jars and canning lids. They're not to be found. And so another manifestation of this food crisis that is actually pretty individual at this moment, that people are figuring it out, grouping together with others in community gardens and whatnot, and maybe within their own families, but it's evolving, changing in an individual way. But despite all the wreckage of a 100-car pileup, the manifestations of which we are only coming to realize, and believe me, there are still cars piling up in the food system pileup. There have been some really interesting stories that have come out of it. All the farmers that had been seeing a decline in their community-supported agriculture subscriptions, and that's CSA, a produce box, some way of bulk buying, they've seen all of those fill up. Many have added, if they could, double, triple. And so that has provided, again, individuals with food security. we found that many farmers have pivoted into offering more standard vegetables. And of course, this crisis evolved in March when a lot of seeds had already been ordered, a lot of ground had been planted, but farmers started pivoting into, well, what do people really need to sustain themselves? Instead of some of the more fringy vegetables, there was a lot of mainline vegetable growing. A lot of restaurants pivoted. And they pivoted as they could, but realized that a lot of farmers were selling to restaurants as part of their marketing portfolio. And when those restaurants closed, when they had to diminish the seating capacity or their ability to serve a lot of people, those markets disappeared. And so some of those restaurants are returning, but they are not returning with the vigor that they did, but they are still buying local food as they can. But perhaps one of the best examples of how the local food system has started to evolve is the Boise Farmers Market. And I want to say that the Treasure Valley Food Coalition is a fiscal sponsor of the market, and I've been a former board member of the market. But in 1 month, the market moved from an anticipated season like every other, an open air every Saturday from April to October. In 1 month, the market became an online ordering drive-through, something which continues today. They average 700 customers every Saturday who have ordered online. The average order is about $70, and there are 3,600 registered customers who have participated in some way in the market this year. But not just has the market become this drive-through experience that is continuing to offer products to local consumers and a market for local farmers. It has also expanded the mobile market, which started 5 years ago. Instead of just operating during the summer, it is now operating till December, offering local products into 11 Boise neighborhoods. And the Boise Farmers Market has also stepped up to be more of a food hub. When I say food hub, I mean that middle piece between selling at a farmer's market, a direct contact, for example, and the end user. So a food hub would involve things like processing or product aggregation or a distribution center, functions like that. So the Boise Farmers Market became a de facto food hub, linking institutional buyers with food offered by the Boise Farmers Market growers. And it's also, and this has not happened yet, but it's rolling out in the next couple of weeks, using excess produce as soups. So they're turning some of that produce that couldn't get sold to the restaurants into soup using the restaurant's capacity, because they're not using their kitchens quite as much. And so we're excited to see a value-added product coming from local produce coming into the homes of local consumers. But these are just a few of the many stories that are happening locally. And they're a little different story than what our next speaker, Mark Winnie, had chronicled in his book. But I think they speak to the resiliency of our local farm and local food community to adapt to what is still a crisis situation, still an invisible problem to many. Mark Winnie wrote a book earlier in which he graciously mentioned Boise as being an interesting place. I've been involved in the food world here for 30 years, and I think it's an interesting place, but I don't have nearly the perspective he does of a national movement at the grassroots, changing the way we eat, helping us to become a healthier nation, a more resilient nation, and I hope a better community for it. So with that, I wanted to introduce my good friend, Mark Winnie. I'm thrilled that he's here to join us. We tried to get him here for Tree Fort, which is Boise's music festival. We had him booked for 3 solid days, and well, that didn't work out so well. But we're happy to have you here today, Mark. Take it away.
1 second, Mark, let's get you unmuted. There we go.
All right. Well, thank you, Janie. That was lovely. And that was a great review of not just your local food system, but what's going on all over the country. And I mean, from what I learned during my time there, it was, you're spot on. You're describing both, what was happening pre-COVID, and but I think also what some of the evidence is that, the future of our food system is more with local and regional, and perhaps not the sort of large scale national industrial model that is common today. So you did a great review, and thank you. And it's just a thrill to be here. Thank you to the Idaho APA for making me a part. I'm really sad that I'm not there in person so that I can actually see you all, like people like Janie and others, face to face. My various trips to Idaho, and particularly to Boise, gave me an opportunity to meet some fantastic people, see some great farmers, see great food projects, meet wonderful elected officials. And just because you were all so exciting and interesting, I just had to write a book about you. So I decided to make Boise I anointed Boise as one of the 7 cities that I think are kind of leading the way to a new food system. It's too bad I have to communicate through a technology that I barely understand. But having said that, it has become more common for me over the last few months since I've had so many speaking opportunities canceled. But in light of the impact that has on my livelihood, I do want you to know that I'm also available to speak at children's birthday parties. If you're looking for a speaker. So it's just wonderful to be here with Janie and others. Janie is, I think, one of the great food activists of the West. She probably making her blush, but my experience has been that she and many of the great people that I know she works with are leading the charge into what I think is going to be a new food system. And boy, what a thrill it was to find out that former city councilwoman Lauren McLean has become the mayor of Boise. I had met then Councilwoman McLean she mentioned at her home, I think it was almost exactly 4 years ago when we had there was a Boise Hunger Summit, and I was attending as a speaker then, and she was kind enough to host a reception. And so based on some of the remarks she made to me, I included some of her comments in my book. And immediately, as you might imagine, after my book was published, she became the mayor. How about that? Is that just a coincidence, or is that just, the Food Town USA bump, we'll call it. Anyway, I'm really happy to see that she has become your mayor. So what I'm going to talk about today is the food system. No surprise there. And more specifically, many different kinds of food systems that are expressed through tens of thousands of communities, states, tribal nations, and regions. And I'm especially pleased to be speaking to planners and those associated with and participating in the planning process. As you may know, the planning profession is a relatively recent newcomer to the food system table. In 2000, a seminal article on food systems planning, The Food System, a stranger to the planning field, appeared in the Journal of the APA, written by 2 faculty members at the University of Wisconsin Urban and Regional Planning School, Jerry Kaufman and Kami Patapucci. And after continued advocacy by Kaufman and a later colleague, Marcia Catton Campbell, food systems planning was accepted as an official division of APA just this year. Now, while I realize it may be a low bar, that may be one of the best things that's happened in 2020. I'll advise you in advance that I'm not going to give you what might be considered a scholarly recitation of the food system, its types and parts and categories. This is not going to be a dissection. This is not going to be a how-to assembly manual. Rather, I'm going to talk from the point of view of my 50 years of experience in the community food system field, as an activist, as a beneficiary, as an observer, and how all of that affects planning and our food system. And I'm also going to talk about ways that we can know our food system better. I mean, I think this is important, how we know what is going on. Today, we, as Janie alluded, we are experiencing threats that we never predicted, barely imagined, and they're bursting with baffling complexity. I'm going to argue that we need to expand our way of knowing this, of understanding how this works, so that we can reimagine a food system that is just, sustainable, and democratically controlled, conditions that do not currently exist. My story begins in 1978 when I received a job interview with a new nonprofit organization called the Hartford Food System in Hartford, Connecticut. Among the questions that were left largely unanswered that day, certainly the biggest one was, what the hell is a food system? In this case, as my 28-year-old self would quickly learn, the idea that a city like Hartford, or any city for that matter, had a food system was a concept invented more or less out of the airy nothing. In Hartford's case, the system came by way of consultants who had been hired by a progressive group of elected officials who saw food as one way to save the then embattled city. In the minds of these political leaders, who would, by the way, be voted out of office about a year after I arrived, a food system was merely a coalition of food organizations and neighborhood stakeholders who had agreed to create farmers markets, community gardens, a cannery, solar greenhouses, food co-ops, and even hopefully bring some supermarkets back into a city that had been completely abandoned by them. These initiatives would be launched as the city was experiencing white flight and would soon become a majority-minority city. I was rewarded over the course of 25 years as I learned from the ground up, in the most intimate and personal of manners, what a food system was, or at least what the city of Hartford's food system was, and later what the state of Connecticut's food system was. Call it slow and steady wins the race. A slow process, slow learning, slow food. Experiential learning can sometimes be painfully frustrating, especially when funders and politicians want quick answers to complex problems, especially when you find yourself buffeted by the headwinds of a community's poverty, hunger, corruption, and even choking indifference. I tell this story to contrast my learning against the more academic approach that has proliferated with the tidal wave of food study programs, as well as the growth in more technologically driven assessments of food systems, such as mapping. I wonder if we as teachers, students, and professionals don't at times subject the food system to the same kind of interrogation that the former US poet laureate Billy Collins sees in his students when he teaches poetry. Collins says, I ask them to take a poem, hold it up to the light like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. The more I see of food system training and research, the more I worry that, like Collins' overzealous students, we are torturing the subject while never getting to know its essence. Sometimes it seems as if we are launching waves of student drones over target zones, holstered with laptops and armed with spreadsheets. Couldn't we sometimes float and flit for a bit, and like butterflies that light on meadow flora, sniff, touch, and taste the place for a while? I like to look at my surroundings through different lenses, hold them up for scrutiny in varying lights, and put my ear to the hive to check the buzz. When it comes to the community food system, we're too much above it all, fueled with high-octane, evidence-based objectivity. The truth is on the ground where we belong, with our subjectivity flagrantly on display. What is uniquely wonderful and instructive about community food system work are the relationships. Like any marketplace, the interactions between the provider of goods and services, with their employees, customers, clients, constituents, and the larger community are essential to its functioning. It's within that bundle of relationships and countless exchanges that you will discover the key to your food system, including its strengths and weaknesses. But that news won't often come to you in the form of data bits. You will also have to release your imagination so that they graze free range across your community food system landscape. As the poet William Carlos Williams wrote, "It's difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." In other words, we need to respect our imaginations. Yes, I want science to be rigorous when searching for a coronavirus vaccine, or for links between factory livestock farming and antibiotic resistance, or sugar and obesity. But when it comes to understanding the community experience, something softer is often called for, something perhaps more intuitive. You see, our imagination is central to our work. Without it, we never would have conceived of this thing we call a food system in the first place. The connections between food, health, environment, and injustice, the idea of a feeding web, even ideas like social capital and community engagement would have remained isolated within their own disciplinary boxes if we hadn't sought a wider horizon. As the great lofty and lefty sociologist C. Wright Mills said in his treatise on social science methodology, The Sociological Imagination, it has been forgotten that social observation requires high skill and acute sensibility. That discovery often occurs precisely when an imaginative mind sets itself down in the middle of social realities. As with most things these days, our understanding of complex problems comes back to our need to apply systems thinking. The definition I'll use is from Kathleen Zerker. The practices of seeking to understand a system as a whole, focusing on causal relationships among parts of the system, rather than on the parts themselves. Examining the system from multiple perspectives and using a broad array of tools to design high leverage interventions for achieving system transformation. When that application is done right, the focus of the community work shifts from, in Zerker's words, reductionist problem solving to transforming systems in service of equitable access to healthy local food. But let's consider the food system from a more, shall we say, zoological perspective. You may be familiar with the Hindu fable of the blind men and the elephant. If we could go to actually my second slide, Christy, I'd appreciate it. And take a look at that. You may be familiar with this fable where these blind wise men, each touch one part of the elephant in an effort to know what it is. And as the little poem goes, it was 6 men of Indostan to learning much inclined. The second slide, please. I'll read it. It was 6 men of Indostan to learning much inclined who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, though each was partly in the right and all were in the wrong. There you go. Even when we understand the elephant and how its parts are connected, we still act as if it's only our part, the part that we touch at the moment that matters, not the whole. Hence our fragmented approach to the food system. At times, this fragmentation has grown so pervasive, I've come to dread the news of yet another new nonprofit food organization, the creation of yet another small USDA grant program, or the rise of yet another charismatic individual proffering the next solution to a poorly defined food problem. To fully understand the food system elephant, we need planners, public health professionals, farmers, gardeners, neighborhood activists, elected officials, chefs, food bankers, anti-hunger activists, and others who understand specialized parts of the elephant to apply systems thinking and use something akin to the collective impact approach. We take a look at the next slide. Just some of you may be familiar with the collective impact approach. I'm not necessarily a religious adherent to it, but I do think its principles are worth noting and keeping in mind when we're doing work, especially in a community setting where we're all trying to find ways to work together and we're more or less interested in the same problem. So having a shared vision, what do you want your community's food system to look like? What would be the goals? You want to make sure that everyone is food secure, that your system is sustainable, that it's meeting carbon emission deadlines and so forth. You want to be able to identify what each of the players is going to do. What is their role going to be in trying to achieve those goals and fulfilling that vision? We also need a way to be communicating more effectively and more frequently with each other. I find that we often just don't have the means to do that, so we each kind of go off in our own direction. We need to agree on evaluation and common measures. In other words, what are we evaluating? How will we know when we're successful? And then I think most importantly, being able to have a way to have an organization or some entity that plays a coordinating function. If you could come back, we can come back to the slides in a few moments, but I'll continue for now. I have explored a lot of this sort of fragmented approach to food system work. And I did this particularly in my previous book, Stand Together or Starve Alone, noting how certain issues seem to rise up periodically like the flavor of the month. I used the obsession with food waste over the last few years as one example. Food activists exhibit this behavior that I call mobbing the issue. From my observations as an assistant coach for my children's soccer teams, it proved impossible, short of nailing their little feet to the turf, to make them play their positions and not mob the ball. Wherever the ball went, so did they, until 22 little children and 44 little legs crawled up and down the field like some giant insect. The antidote to mobbing, at least in the community level, is the use of collective impact and coordinated action. Again, not always to be religiously adhered to, but to understand and do the best you can to apply its principles. I think the other thing that's important as a concept is something we call multiple interventions, which are directed at a single problem or a set of problems. A method sometimes I refer to as surround sound, for its ability to use numerous modalities to attack a target from all parts of the compass. Let me offer a couple of illustrations, and if we could go to a few more slides, that would be great. One thing that we try to do when we're trying to address food access, particularly in areas that we term food deserts or food swamps, where we don't have adequate access. If we can go to that slide, that would be great, Christy. Is that we find that one single intervention, one single project or activity doesn't always work well, or it's not enough. One action that we've often taken is, well, how do maybe we can reduce the consumption of unhealthy food through a tax on sugary soft drinks. Well, doing that by itself hasn't necessarily proved to be successful. Sometimes we can bring a new supermarket back into a city. That sometimes is certainly helpful, but it's often not enough. What we need are multiple interventions. I'll give one example from a Baltimore project that I had some involvement with. We had two independent supermarkets who were operating in similar neighborhoods, kind of low to middle income neighborhoods, same size stores, same formats. They were stocked equally with a large amount of high quality fruits and vegetables. One of the stores had numerous interventions, lots of shelf talkers, in-store demonstrations, nutrition information, just went on and on. The other didn't have any of those. The store with all the interventions had a 28% increase in the purchase of healthy food. The one without only had a 6%. So you can see that there is there's additional impact from having the multiple interventions. If we go to the next slide, we see yet another form of bringing together our resources in one place. And these are what we are calling food policy councils. I've been particularly active in these myself over the past 2 or 3 decades now, I guess. But this is something that has been on the rise as the results of this survey from Johns Hopkins demonstrate. Just go back to 2008. This is North America, Canada and the US, including tribal communities. And in 2008, there were 94 food policy councils. In 2017, 341. In fact, the number right now is closer to 400 if the data will be updated in a few months. So if we can go to the next slide, what we see from food policy councils is that they are a way to bring together the stakeholders of a community. They are they are essentially kind of a planning venue. No city, interestingly, even really no state, has anything called a Department of Food. Those functions are usually distributed across many different departments. So a food policy council really almost acts as a department of food. And it is a planning venue. It is a place where we think about how we want our food system to perform. As I said, it brings together many different stakeholders. It focuses on health and planning, economic development, agriculture, really the whole 9 yards when it comes to the food system. It does conduct assessments and planning. And I think we're seeing this more now. It's beginning to serve as a real voice for the community, bringing people together from all walks of life, particularly people who are most affected by some of the failures of the food system so that they have a voice in trying to address it. If we go to the next slide, we can see what happens when we don't pay attention to coordination and collective impact. In East Harlem, New York, with high rates of poverty and high rates of diet-related illness, there was an attempt starting in 2000 to try to address these problems, bringing new supermarkets into the city, or rather into East Harlem, grocery carts, some farmers markets, a number of food programs, nonprofit and service-related programs. New York City Food Policy Center at Hunter College went and assessed what the impact of this had been over 15 years, from 2000 to 2015. There was virtually no reduction in poverty and no reduction in diet-related illness. And the reasons that they posited were these: that we needed to have more community ownership, more community-based and owned alternative outlets, not just rely on getting big chain stores to come into the area. They also, in addition to increasing the amount of healthy food, had to reduce the availability of unhealthy food and promotion related to that. They also recommended more creative use of SNAP. And this is the biggest, the food stamp program. This is the biggest food program in the country, particularly for lower income families. And it has to do more than simply provide calories to people. It has to be used creatively to get healthy food, to also encourage economic development in certain areas. They recommended a food hub that would facilitate the purchase of healthy food for all kinds of local food programs, and particularly emphasize local food. They wanted to make food a part of all city departments, not just say the Department of Health. They recommended the creation of Food Policy Council to provide that hub to actually bring people together and create a centralized database so they could really begin to have information that was more transparently available. We can look at the next slide. Moving away from this notion of what are the sort of the deficits in our food system, clearly one of the major assets that has emerged and we need to pay attention to, take advantage of, and see how we can optimize is the growth of local food and its impact. This is some data from the US Department of Agriculture, from a study that was done about 3 years ago. they looked at the value of local food in 1992, only about $400 million. In 2012, it was over $6 billion. And the projection they have for today, 2020, is about 20 billion. It's a pretty significant increase. At the same time, you can see the high percentage of consumers who are looking for local food or making shopping decisions or buying decisions based on local food. We can see almost an exponential increase in the amount of federal funding for food programs over the last 10 years or so. Tremendous growth in food hubs, CSAs, well over 50,000 schools participating in farm to school. That's a little over half of all public schools in America have some form of farm to school. The growth in the SNAP program, but some of the more creative uses of SNAP through programs such as double up bucks, veggie scripts, and other incentives to help lower income shoppers. Even Walmart is getting on board with more local food. And don't take this number literally, but I think I've seen more brands of salsa than I've ever could imagine there were. And while this number is a very, very rough estimate, it certainly reflects the growth in those sort of cottage industries, small scale food production processing, which is really fun and exciting. So we can return to me, but just to give you a sense that, it's wonderful, really, I mean, it's important that remember how the local food scene has grown, how it's become such a force in our communities. But I think at the same time, and particularly as Janie was revealing earlier, that we have to recognize that we also have tremendous failures, that the food system elephant is not working for everybody. And it has become, and the failures and the impacts are falling disproportionately on people and communities of color. As COVID-19 has starkly revealed, rates of infection among essential workers in meat plants, restaurants, grocery stores, and farm fields have been through the roof. I think the best statement on this is by Brooke Jarvis, who wrote an article in the New York Times Magazine about COVID. She said, it's clear that COVID, that many of the lowest paid and the least respected jobs in America were in fact the most important. The ones that could not be paused or interrupted or bypassed if society was to keep functioning. People who had regularly been called illegal suddenly found themselves rebranded as essential. But the food system's failures do affect everyone. As Kamir Anshayan, a professor at the University of Northern Iowa, points out in a recent op-ed, 50 million pounds of highly hazardous pesticides are applied annually to corn and bean fields throughout Iowa, one of our largest ag producing states. Rural Iowans can't breathe because of air pollution from industrial hog and egg facilities. Similarly, he says that a plethora of highly processed fatty and sugary foods are easily available throughout his rural and poor urban communities, while access to fresh fruits and vegetables is often severely restricted. This is sadly a common story in numerous places in America. It happened pre-COVID, and it has only gotten worse for those who are at really what we might say the lowest end of the food chain, but who are our essential workers. But if we can get back to the idea of the elephant for a moment, by calling out some of the examples, I want to call out some of the examples from my book, Food Town USA, to illustrate the diversity of the local food system and how one might come to understand it. So if we could go to my next slide, that would be great. I set out on this little expedition to write Food Town USA because it just became apparent to me that no matter where I went, some kind of food scene or food activity was going on. You go down to several slides.
It'll take just a minute because there's a slight lag with the internet, so it'll.
Oh, I see. Okay.
There we go.
Oh, okay, I forgot that. Let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry. So what I was doing with Food Town was deciding that, I think that good food was, in my estimation anyway, becoming the new normal. It wasn't just a sort of a bunch of quirky hippies, you might say, who were deciding to go out and start natural food restaurants. This was becoming a part of American life. And so I wanted to see what were the food influences in a community, what was going on, and how had they changed over, say, the last 10 years. I wanted to see what some of the factors that were contributing to the development of a robust food culture, and understand how communities were meeting the challenges of good food for all. In other words, how were they being inclusive? Was everybody benefiting? Were they doing a good job of taking care of their own? In other words, what were some of the challenges facing those communities? And along the way, I discovered some amazing places like Sitka, Alaska, and something they called Planning Day. Planning Day was an event where one day every year, they brought the community together. They've been doing this since 2008 to select projects that the community wants to support for the coming year. Things that they need, ideas that people have been incubating for a while, decided let's bring it all together and see what let's see what the community wants. Almost 60% of those projects that they had been selected since 2008 were food and farm projects. And perhaps that's not surprising in the community where 99% of their food must travel 800 miles by water from the lower 48. In Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, a city devastated by the collapse of the US steel industry, city government and foundations made major investments in food business startups that are owned and operated by local people. And I think what was interesting about this, they did development in and around these areas, particularly in lower income neighborhoods that would support those markets, provide market demand. In one case, they actually located a new regional arts school, charter school for the arts. 650 students come every day to the school, and they eat in these cafes, restaurants, and so forth in this area. All of them are owned by local people, often lower income people. The charter art school also hosts about 90 different events. Students are putting on shows constantly during the school year, and they're in the evening, and they're attended by family members and friends and so forth. That provides additional market demand for food. So it's just an example of development that was started out with food, but was supported by a number of other longer term development strategies. I also found a lower income Alexandria, Louisiana, central Louisiana, about three hours north of New Orleans, where Regional Economic Development Agency has been committing significant resources and staff to developing its rural and urban food systems. Food has traditionally been a poor stepchild in the world of community economic development, but we are finally seeing local officials pay attention to what is often the second or third largest part of their local economies. In the case of Alexandria, they were using economic development in a fairly traditional sense of trying to attract larger companies to relocate or locate, whether there was startups or just moving entirely. But they found that the quality of life in the town was not sufficient to attract businesses that had with many professionals who were looking for good restaurants, good cafes, brew pubs, so forth, even a farmer's market. So they realized that they had to also improve the quality of their food world, their food environment, in order to attract more people who wanted those places. So that there was a synergy between food and also bringing in new, higher paying jobs and businesses. And then of course there was Boise. Now, keep in mind that for a writer, there's always a danger in returning to a place that you wrote about. You know, some people will be happy with what you wrote, some will be angry. Some will feel like they deserve more credit. Some will feel they deserve less credit. One person I interviewed asked me to describe them as taller than they were. Another person asked me to describe them as ruggedly handsome. I told her no. But as I found in Boise and all 7 cities I investigated, our food systems benefit from imaginative, community-sanctioned forms of social entrepreneurism, shaped by a diversity of compassionate, empathetic, and autonomous individuals. Boise distinguished itself for the emergence of a robust food scene, as well as for the quality of engagement by City Hall. I'll never forget sitting with local farmer Tim Summer and later restaurateur David Crick in Boise's Red Feather Lounge, as they both expressed concern for each other's well-being and demonstrated the underlying respect they hold for the farmer-chef bond. Tim telling me how a snowstorm had destroyed some of his greenhouses, and the community came together and raised $30,000 to re-erect and rebuild those greenhouses, and how David Crick continued to be working as closely as he could with farmers and trying to help them through the challenges that they had and trying to provide markets and a fair price for the products he was buying and expanding the opportunities for farmers. I would say that I think the one thing I learned the most from that experience is, if there's one thing the planners can do, if there's one thing that City Hall can do, if there's one thing that any of us can do, is to use all the power you have to bolster those kinds of relationships between farmer and buyer, between farmer and chef, between producers and any form of buyer. This is a very critical part of the relationship, and it's very much at the heart of our food system and trying to develop a local food system. So what were some of the lessons that I learned from all these cities, all 7 cities, which I think in a way were not unique at all? And I could go to the next slide if you don't mind. I think that there was a certain universality between all these places. And I probably should say that they weren't places that were had high foodie profiles. That's one of the reasons I selected them. I wasn't looking for Boulder or Berkeley or Brooklyn. I was looking for Boise. And some of the things that I learned from all these places collectively was that there were common concerns, very strongly held, when it came to food insecurity and limited access to healthy food. There were diet-related health problems, and in many cases, they were getting worse. Climate change was becoming really apparent, particularly in Sitka, Alaska, which I would almost regard as sort of the canary in the mine, with problems of warming oceans, declining fishing, and certain species not being abundant enough to fish. Impact on the native food. The native Alaskan culture was suffering because some of their subsistence foods were in decline. I saw at the very far end of the country in Jacksonville, Florida, far as you could get from Sitka almost and still be in the United States. Hurricanes were devastating neighborhoods. Beaches were eroding. Communities that had been washed away were not being replaced. Gardens, farmers were being affected by high water. Even the road system, which carries food on trucks, was under threat because there were so many bridges and so much hurricane and water force. So again, we see that. We saw how I saw the impact of how local economies were growing and diversifying because of food. I saw racial divide and inequity everywhere in different forms. Clearly a divide. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? How is our food system, particularly at a community level, not responding effectively to inequity? But I also at the same time saw how people were coming together to try to resolve that. I think maybe sort of fascinating to me was the fact that so much of what I found wasn't even there 10 to 15 years ago. This was new. The businesses were new. Everybody was talking about something they had started anywhere from say 2009 or 2010 right up until the present. Food system awareness was growing. People would talk about a food system. They talk about the parks. They talk about their connections. That was fascinating to see sort of that intellectual development and understanding. Clearly, food was making a significant contribution to the local economy and to the quality of life. You know, the demographics were changing, and that was interesting to follow. And sometimes there were complaints that the demographics were changing in a way that had an adverse effect on the people who were already there. I mean, one person would say, you know, in what had previously been a lower income neighborhood, affordable housing, you know, with the addition of a new cafe or brew pub, they'd say something like, oh no, there goes the neighborhood, meaning that, you know, the yuppies were moving in. But in effect, there were many complicated forces, particularly housing prices, that had an influence on that. And at the same time, there was a considerable amount of sensitivity from the part of entrepreneurs about what their impact would be if, in fact, there would be a positive outcome for everybody from that development. Clearly, local government was engaged far more than it has been in a very long, than I've ever seen with food. Food policy councils were becoming more common. This is maybe my next biggest takeaway, which the important role that individuals play. I've been a person very much in the the group. I'm a group guy. I believe in the power of the group, of the organization, everybody working together. But very much what was revealed to me is the important role that individuals, particularly entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, not just, you know, business people looking to make a profit, but people who really wanted to make change or bring new businesses or projects to bear. I was reminded of a slogan or statement from Ralph Waldo Emerson: there is no history, there's only biography. In other words, the importance of the individual was paramount. And among those individuals, very prominently, were millennials, seeing them coming back to cities they may have left when they perhaps, you know, grew up, left, went to college or whatever, coming back, taking advantage of opportunities to make a difference in their own place. That became extremely apparent to me. And entrepreneurism, as I was saying, that was sort of redefined in the sense of being community supported, a mutual form of support for everybody who wanted to get into the game. Being helpful, providing technical assistance and training, coaching, mentoring. There was also a sense really that we're going to all make it together. If any one of us fails, we all fail. And that was very moving to see that kind of action. So I wanted to learn more about food systems and to sort of try to consider how you can play more of a role in developing food systems, supporting them, enhancing their outputs. I would encourage you to put aside some of those ropes and hoses I referred to in the Billy Collins poem. In addition to those juicy, sexy planning reports that you read more fiction and poetry. Those are the ingredients you're going to need to build a healthy imagination. Get to know the elephant well. Yes, specialization is still good. So as times go on, find the specialty that most fires your passion. It will enable you to develop expertise in one part of the elephant. And for those students and early career practitioners out there, specialization will let you earn a living so you don't have to live with your parents when you're 30. But that specialization will only be useful to you after you've become a systems thinker. And don't limit your systems thinking to only food and planning subjects. Tarry a while in other places outside your immediate area of expertise. It will only heighten your sense of astonishment. I want the food systems umbrella to embrace more, to expand its wings, not close itself up in ever smaller units of study. Respect the data, but don't become obsessed with it. We must stay close to the people and those relationships because they are essential to the food system and to the very quality of our lives. I want to walk down the street and feel the food system's beat, the pulse of new entrepreneurs making a go of it with their food startups, the harangue of a community organizer bringing food desert residents together to fight for a food store, a new food store, or to repeal a regressive food tax. This is joy, the kind of joy you feel from the hum and the thrum of a Saturday morning farmer's market. This is real, and this is how food together collectively catapults our lives over the wall of the mundane into the land of promise and possibilities. I'm not aware of any place richer than our vast and still measureless food system that can grant our imaginations such unfettered play. The path to justice runs through our food systems. The path to a sustainable and healthy future reveals itself in our food systems. And the path to a high quality community life for all courses through our food systems. I urge you to embrace your role as food system actors, change agents, and catalysts to bring those rewards to us sooner rather than later. Time is of the essence. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for the good work you're doing. And enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.
All right, Mark, thank you very much. I think Christy is going to moderate some questions from the audience, so we'll get that up and running. But yeah, thank you for tying that to planning. I was curious how that was going to all come together, and personally read the book as promised last week when we met for the first time. So great read. I encourage all of our membership to look into it. I think several of our initial folks who registered are going to receive a copy of the book as well as a part of their registration. So with that, I'll hand it over to Christy to run the questions for you.
Thank you. We do have a question that has come in. We have a funny anecdote as well to share. So the first question that's come through is, what policies have you seen enacted by local communities to reach our most difficult / poorest populations, those who live rurally and don't have access to adequate transportation?
Yeah, that is really a kind of a core question and a core problem. I think the things that we've been using, and I think they're relatively effective, certainly been incentive programs that provide, coupons of some form or another, double up bucks for SNAP, as I mentioned, veggie prescriptions, providing, again, the opportunity to get, higher quality, particularly local food. Clearly, transportation in rural areas is a major challenge. I think that, so far the best solution has been to sort of go the other way. Instead of trying to bring people to the food through transportation, though I would certainly look for good solutions to that, it's to bring the food to the people through the form of mobile pantries, mobile farmers markets, special days that are set up at community centers where food can be brought. That kind of process has shown the most promise so far. And often those do require policies. In other words, they require some intervention or action on the part of government or some regional authority, certainly a nonprofit or an institution such as a hospital. I think also that one thing that's been promising that I've seen increasingly in rural areas, and if you want a good place to look for a model, look to Kansas, is the formation of food policy councils. In Kansas, they don't call them food policy councils because I think policy is a little bit of a dirty word or a political statement. So they will call themselves something else like a local food coalition or just a food network or something like that. But the number and most of these in Kansas are in rural areas, some very rural and very large rural areas. And they have done a rather remarkable job of not only bringing attention to the problems and the issues, but they've also been pretty good at finding resources and developing some coordinated solutions. to problems. Small grant programs, small seed type grant programs to start food projects in rural areas have been one solution. So I would say food policy councils in a way are sort of a process solution. How do we bring people together to gather resources and ideas and generate energy and use our resources efficiently? But I think for the time being that the mobile strategies and also and to some extent investing in local stores, that has been another strategy. Particularly rural areas, maybe there is a grocery store that is either had closed recently or sort of hanging on by the skin of its teeth. Looking at ways that you can invest in those. Again, fostering entrepreneurship. I've come across one particular case in Kansas where some very entrepreneurial people, local people, are bringing back a store that actually was a garden center, but now they're going to make it a garden center focused on local food. They're going to make it really a food hub. So that's going to really bring together a lot of energy around food. But that would be my initial take on that question.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We had another, we had another question come in. It says, what kind of SNAP policies are working? If a month's supply of food is purchased on one shopping day, the fresh food may spoil before it's eaten.
Could you just repeat the beginning of that again? I lost a couple of words.
That's okay. It says, what kind of SNAP policies are working?
Oh. Well, I think it's more like it's an offshoot of SNAP, which is to provide additional incentives. So if someone uses $10 of SNAP benefits at a farmer's market, the additional funds, additional $10 will be used to double the amount of produce that somebody buys. I mean, that's sort of the common example. The veggie script approach is providing funds, such as a doctor speaking with a patient who has diet related health problems, providing them with what amounts to a prescription, which is usually, again, coupons or of some sort to shop at farmers markets. Those have become quite popular and I think reasonably effective. I think, as I was saying earlier, the idea of sort of the multiple interventions, we don't solve big problems, complex problems with only one intervention. And, I think where these things have been most successful is when they have been coupled with education program, nutrition education programs, maybe even some gardening programs, even support where we sort of maximize the social support of family and community and people, such as meals that are shared and prepared together. If I was to say, how would I maximize SNAP benefits? I would be looking at, how do I, bring in other forms of support to SNAP recipients so that they can develop, their ability to eat better and healthier food. Was there another part of that question that I missed?
No, I think there was, let me go back to it, I apologize. The second part was if a month's supply of food is purchased on one shopping day, the fresh food may spoil before it's eaten.
Oh yeah, well, yes, I mean, that's right. I mean, this is certainly a shortcoming. I mean, to give somebody $20 worth of coupons and then you go and you spend them all at once and one day at the farmer's market, it's not going to last you for very long. Or if you go and you try to stock up on a lot of things, it won't last you for a month. This, I think, more regular, smaller increments of funding distributed over a longer period of time are certainly more effective than that kind of one-stop. Here's $20 of coupons, and more as we see more funding for these kinds of programs, we are seeing that the capacity expand so that people are getting more incentives, more funding for incentives and other related nutrition assistance and food education programs. So that's beginning to make a difference. But yes, I don't think you can expect somebody to, shop for a month, get all the fresh produce they're supposed to have in a month, and hope that it lasts, because it won't.
Okay. Let's see, we do have more questions. And for those of you attending, I did put the link to get Mr. Wynn's book in the chat. Okay. So the next question is, how can planners and the private sector work together to avoid displacement of existing food cultures in currently lower cost areas that are expecting redevelopment and growth?
Well, certainly maybe the best way is to include those people in the planning process. Again, I go back, whether there has to be a common venue or a common table. Food Policy Council can sometimes serve that function. But too often we only have the professionals sitting down at the table, the planners, let's say, with people running food programs or other institutions such as hospitals or foundations or insurance companies. That's not enough. We need to make sure that you don't start planning without being inclusive of the community that you're planning with and for. So I think that's step one. And I think that has to really be built into the process, very much so. As I recall, I know that Boise had something they called the blueprint, and I wrote about it in the Boise chapter, and it seemed like a pretty comprehensive example of how to engage the community and come up with creative examples of development that does not displace people, that looks at how you can integrate different kinds of smaller businesses across a wider landscape. So in other words, we're not concentrating all the businesses and food businesses in sort of one central business district. We're spreading them out to sort of improve the quality of community life and neighborhood life. I think along with that, it appeared to me that there was indeed a reasonable amount of inclusivity directed at neighborhood residents who were involved in the process for developing that blueprint. I think models like that are fairly common now. I think hopefully we're past those days when all the decisions are being made from the higher up, whether they're from elected officials or planners or others. I think a planner would be in deep doo-doo these days if they went ahead without being, consulting the community, not just consulting, but making them a part of that process right from the get-go. I think also the idea of what about community ownership of particularly if we're thinking about food, and we're thinking about small food businesses. Are we targeting just sort of certainly, I certainly wouldn't recommend targeting chains, but but also, there's a certain class of folks who are going to be, like the entrepreneurs sort of hungry to get into it. But maybe we need to also be cultivating entrepreneurs who maybe don't know they are an entrepreneur, and really digging deeply into the roots of the community to find those people who have an interest and some of the wherewithal to be business owners and business developers, and work with them to develop businesses that are much more reflective of that neighborhood or that community. The example I gave from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, I think was a pretty good example of how you can do that with a great deal of sensitivity. And they had almost 50 different restaurants, with reflecting, I can't remember if it was somewhere like 15 to 20 different cultures in a relatively small community. And a lot of support was being provided in the development of those businesses right from the ground up. So I think that's another way you can protect against that sort of, yuppification, or whatever you want to call it, of the development process.
Okay, thank you. We have another one, and this one says it's an in the weeds question. It says, many Idaho communities have pushed back on food trucks, not seeing them as an incubator for local entrepreneurial. Any suggestions on how planners can gain community support?
This is sort of interesting question. Two examples actually from recently for me from Kansas. Again, very rural areas. Small towns, 1,000 to 2,000 people, and in some cases even less. It was a group that wanted to do a food truck, and they were getting pushback from the community. They were getting pushback from the county commissioners, I believe, and but they realized that there wasn't anything in the law or the regulations that actually forbid them from doing this. And they realized that what they had to do was get smarter about policy. They had to really work harder at trying to understand, what was going on. So they spent a lot of time educating themselves. They brought in a few people from sort of outside their immediate community to help them sort of navigate this process. In other words, they got smart about their own local policy and their own local politics and their own local decision-making processes. And ultimately they won. They were able to convince everybody that that a food truck was a good idea, that it wasn't violating some some unwritten code. And it took determination. I think it almost took them 2 years to get approval, but it was that kind of persistence and an agreement on their part that they had to get smart themselves about a process that they were still a little uncertain about. The other example was a little bit of what I might call your in-your-face example. Another small Kansas community, actually a fairly well-known foodie decided he wanted to do a food truck and get out into the community and sell a lot of local food, and absolutely just ran up against a brick wall. And they said, well, you can't do a food truck, but you can do a food business. You can do a store, a fixed brick and mortar kind of store. And he found a really nice old building that he was able to refurbish. But to kind of show him, put him in their place, he took the food truck that he'd already bought and outfitted it and put it inside the store. And so you go inside this restaurant store, and you walk up to the food truck window with all the kitchen appliances and so forth. They're in the truck, and you order from the truck. You don't eat in the truck, but it was kind of his way of getting even. So many ways to skin a cat. No offense to cat owners.
I like that. That's nice. I don't have any more questions coming in, so we'll give it a few seconds to see. We did have, if those of you watching haven't gone into the chat or session Q&A, there's a lot of really good information that's being shared in there, and I thought I'd share that with you too as well, Mark. Under one of the questions, Ellen shared a link to the Global Gardens Boise. It's an example of a local CSA that incorporates equity approaches in its programming. So please visit that as well. And then Aaron shared that he worked with the, I'm going to pronounce this horribly, Keynote Indian tribe to help build stronger food connections. One solution they utilized was a community van system to both bring people to the community center where food was available and deliver foods, meals and ingredients to those who didn't have access to reliable transportation. And they also put an emphasis on subsistence living, preservation, and shared community foods. Much of their local food was grown at the tribal center in covered hoop houses that served a large portion of the community. So that's a really great example. Let's see if another one came.
I'm just going to add also that with respect to transportation, it's usually in rural areas, regional transportation authorities, and they're always stretched. They're always kind of stretched for money, and Ridership is maybe not as high as I'd like. So again, what I have found that some areas where there's been some productive resolution has been, again, those people with a real significant food interest, whether it's a food policy council or food network of some kind, working with those authorities, with those regional planners, transportation planners, trying to figure out what can we do. So putting more heads together around a problem, and seeing where there might be some solutions. I think also, what I have learned over the years is that, well, I started out learning that I didn't know anything at all about transportation, about public transportation, other than maybe how to ride the bus once in a while. And once you dig in, with a food system hat on and start to look at transportation, you start to have, that's interesting. There's a lot of aha moments. And, I was able to contribute something to a transportation problem, and the transportation planners were able to contribute something back to me. And we found sort of a kind of collective approach of, working together with respective skill sets, where we were able to actually, come up with some pilot projects that were address those problems.
Okay, thank you. We have another question that came in. What do you see the city's role is in facilitating these changes? Policy changes, holding Q&As? What's a good starting point?
I think getting to know your food system, as I've been trying to say, how do you know it? I mean, you can start knowing it through mapping, but mapping will only go so far. I mean, mapping, it will say here are the stores, here are the farmers markets. You can overlay neighborhoods where there's income and wealth disparities. We can learn a lot, and that's a good place to start. But we then have to get the boots on the ground and be meeting with people and talking to people, whether it's through small group discussions, focus groups. I really like focus groups. I've done a lot of those over the years. 6 to 8 people. Make sure you bring food. The people come. Let them work together. Let them enjoy some good food. Make sure there's childcare or other forms of support. Maybe they need help with transportation. They actually come to the group, but they often reveal some really interesting strategies. So I think government really has to foster the fact-finding process, but they also have to sort of at the same time listen very acutely to the community at the same time. And focus groups and other more intimate settings, I think, are a way to go with that. I mean, I like public hearings. I like the bigger sort of town hall forums. I referred to the example from the planning day in Sitka, Alaska. This was run by it was a partnership between government and a healthcare coalition, and people have their own ideas, and they sometimes those ideas aren't going to make it, or there's not enough sort of wherewithal, but oftentimes they are good ideas, and there's a lot of people that want to get behind them. But I think the process doesn't just result in new projects being formed, it also results in learning a lot about the community. It's like an assessment process going on in real time, as you're going back and forth trying to stretch each other's thinking a little bit about what's going to work and what's needed. The last thing I'm gonna say about it is time. You gotta be patient. You can't be tyrannized by the clock, whether it's in a meeting. I think some cultural competency is sometimes required. Different people learn and communicate in different ways. And all of us, particularly those who want to put ideas into action, need to slow down and listen. So these aren't problems that are going to resolve themselves easily and quickly. They're often things that, take a lot of careful, thought and discussion within the community.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions, but I do want to share a fun comment from Don, who said he was involved in an elementary school outreach program. Planners and architects spending time with third graders to enhance their curriculum and community issues. One of the students said that he thought we were planters, and we soon found that many others thought the same things. Perhaps we should keep that in mind. I love that one, so I wanted to share with everybody.
Well, I think planners are planters. I mean, they are hopefully in one way or another tilling the soil and sowing the seeds. So I would certainly keep that sort of relationship in mind, the duality of the planner and the planter.
Okay. Okay, I do have one more that came in. See, I share an anecdote and more people ask a question. I like it.
You planted a seed.
Yeah, I planted the seed. This one is, can you share more specific strategies that cities are using for food economic development?
Yeah, this is one that is kind of setting the stage strategy, which is actually determine what the value of your food economy is. It's not that, it takes a little bit of digging and a little bit of quantification, but it's possible to figure out, how much does everybody spend on food? How much is spent at restaurants? How many people are employed in a restaurant? How many people are employed in different facets of the food system? If there's any tourist component involved or entertainment component around food, quantify that. What you find in the process ultimately is it represents collectively a very big part of your local economy. So that kind of arms you with the data and the sort of the sense that food is it's something unfortunately I found that city governments over the years have just taken food for granted. It just hasn't been literally it's not on their plates, and only more recently that they are starting to see what the value of food has been in terms of jobs, quality of life. It's sort of like you have to tell a story too. I mean, you have to present the data, but you also have to tell a story about what food has done perhaps for the identity of your community. How it contributes to the quality of life beyond just, it's not just sustenance, it's also something that speaks to the cultural attributes of your place. It is your place. It's part of your identity. It was very interesting doing the interviews that I did in Boise with some of the chefs who talked about a thing called their food identity. What was their food identity? And there seemed to be some disagreement over whether or not Boise had a food identity. And some people thought yeah, and some said no, we're not there yet. But it seemed to be, even though I couldn't necessarily define what Boise's food identity is or was, it seemed to be a topic that resonated with a lot of people. So it was important enough to say, if we do define an identity, if we do that, and we uphold that, even if it's a sort of very diverse one, it has value, intrinsic value unto itself. People will come here and be a part of this place because we do have a certain kind of identity. I know it's got a nuance, but it's something that I think we need to pay attention to. But we went through this assessment, this kind of economic impact assessment in my hometown of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and found that food was huge. I mean, had almost $1 billion impact in the county with 150,000 people, and that was, I think, second only to It might have been the healthcare industry, perhaps. So, quantifying that is a way for you to sort of start that discussion about how we can, gather more value and what all the different points of value of our food system are, and make those arguments to elected officials. I'm going to add one more thing, which is, looking for opportunities within planning documents. I mean, a long-term strategic plan for your town or county, 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plans. How often do we look at those things? We never see the word food mentioned once. Sometimes we don't even see farm. We see farming sort of talked about as farmland, which seems to suggest that it's really just land that's waiting to be developed, rather than land that is really going to, producing some multiple forms of value. Sort of a multi-functionality of farmland is not expressed or captured. And I think it's important to use those planning opportunities, those longer term planning documents, to make sure that food and farming and everything related to it is included. I'll say one more thing, which is that I think there's and this is overlooked in the discussion of climate change, is the role of the food system and the contribution that it makes to climate change, greenhouse gas emissions. I think it's somewhere in the 20 to 25% of our greenhouse gas emissions are related to agriculture. And particularly, I'd say the largest contributor is livestock agriculture. And the more we become aware of how our dietary choices impact the environment, the more we hopefully can modify our own individual behavior, but also become more aware of it as a community food system challenge as well.
Thank you. I don't have any additional questions. Leon, did you have anything you'd like to share here at the end?
Nothing I'd like to share other than a thank you to Mark and Janie and the mayor and everyone who listened in today and participated. I think this was one of our most well-attended keynote speaker events to date. So again, this virtual format has given us some opportunities we didn't have before. But yeah, thank you so much for all that you've shared and for being with us today. But that's all I have.
Thanks. Great. Thank you very much. And I wish everybody in Idaho well, and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and end the session. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day with the wonderful sessions. And don't forget to check out the exhibitors and sponsors tabs on the side to check out the wonderful sponsors we've had for this conference. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.